Chapter 83. Christina Rogerus. The Holy Empire Uruz had claimed Helmuth's border province of Al-Qardi as its diocese. 1. As part of the concessions established by the demon kings, the province served as a bridge between Uruz and Helmuth. But could the demon folk really find salvation through faith? In Eugene's opinion, such a thing was absolutely impossible. In the first place, it was both foolish and useless to proselytize your faith to the demon folk, who had already rebelled against the gods. However, it wasn't just the demon folk who lived in Helmuth. Even after excluding the black wizards and their dependents, there were actually quite a lot of ordinary people living in Helmuth, namely those who had signed a contract with the demon folk and now worshipped the demon kings. They had chosen to do so not just for any absurd reason, but for a most realistic and reasonable exchange. Helmuth was a human-friendly country. The citizens there were guaranteed a minimum standard of living even if they didn't do any work. Vast numbers of demonic beasts had been bound as familiars to the demon king and performed any difficult labor in place of the country's citizens. And it wasn't just demonic beasts either. There were also the undead, which had been raised by high-ranking demon folk and black wizards. These non-human monsters would do all the work in place of the humans, or at least in place of the humans who would otherwise be engaged in agriculture. So the vast land of Helmuth was usually covered with the golden color of wheat regardless of the season. The citizens of Helmuth did not have to pay their taxes in money. The taxes that they were made to pay each month came in the form of their easily recoverable life force. And they were far from onerous. And if they wished, a citizen could even enjoy quite a luxurious life in Helmuth by mortgaging their soul. As long as they paid off the mortgage before they died, it was even possible for them to reclaim their mortgaged souls. And if they weren't able to reclaim their souls? Well, then the price of the luxury they had enjoyed in life would have to be repaid after they had died. In other words, they would be transformed into undead slaves upon their deaths. However, the world was full of idiots who wanted to live in luxury and enjoy the glory that came with wealth, even if it meant becoming undead slaves once they died. Helmuth had no problem accepting the immigration requests of these idiots. 10 years, that was all that the demon king of incarceration asked in return from these new citizens of his country. Their post-mortem period of labor would be restricted to 10 years at the very most. So in return for several decades of a happy life in Helmuth, they would only have to work for 10 years after their death. Although the cost of immigrating to Helmuth was quite high, it wasn't so much that those desperate to do so were unable to afford it. As such, the Al-Qardi diocese hadn't been established for the sake of the demon folk. Instead, its purpose was to convert the humans who had settled down in Helmuth. Even though they had sold their souls to the damned demon folk and their demon kings, as long as they possessed a firm faith, they would be able to ascend to heaven, even if it was only after they had finished their labor term. The Al-Qardi diocese peddled the salvation desired by those idiots who had chosen to exchange the wealth and glory they had experienced in life for harsh labor after they had died. And the one who assisted the diocesan bishop in charge was Auxiliary Bishop Christina Rogerus. She was the adopted daughter of one of Uruz's 3 cardinals, and she was a candidate for continuing the lineage of saints that a niece had been a part of. Although she couldn't currently be called a saint, Christina was the only actual candidate that Uruz had put forth to become a saint, so within the next few years it was certain that she would officially inherit the title of saint. Something about her. Eugene narrowed his eyes as he stared into the distance. When they arrived, Eugene and Cyan had been dropped out of the sky, but there was actually a warp gate within the Black Lion Castle. Currently Eugene, Cyan, and Seal had all come out of the castle and were waiting together in front of the warp gate. Eugene wasn't the only one who had come out to greet their guests. All the knights within the Black Lion Castle were here, and even the elders and the patriarch, who hadn't left the round table since the day before, were present and waiting in front of the warp gate. Their presence was an indication of just how important this sudden visitation was. Glancing at the elders, Eugene noticed that there were signs of agitation written all over their faces. Then he turned his gaze back towards the warp gate. Eugene finished his previous thought. Is familiar. Just a few moments prior, Auxiliary Bishop Christina had stepped through the warp gate. Arriving with 3 escorts, Christina took a look around her and then lifted her skirt slightly in a curtsy. "Thank you for the impressive welcome," she greeted them. She wore a white veil that was fixed to her head with a tiara, but this didn't pose a huge obstacle to checking her facial features. Eugene continued to squint his eyes as he stared at Christina's face. Anise Slywood, Eugene caught the appearance of this comrade from 300 years ago within Christina's features. Although he couldn't tell if these similarities continued to their personalities, Christina's face so resembled a niece's that he couldn't help but wonder if she was somehow descended from a niece. "We weren't aware that you would truly be coming in person," Doyne stepped forward and spoke to her. "After receiving a call that necessitated my presence, of course I would choose to answer it," Christina explained with a soft smile as she bowed her head. Eugene noticed the short wand that Christina had hanging from her waist. The shining golden wand had a cross, the symbol of the god of light, attached to its end, and from just a quick glance, Eugene could tell that it was far from an ordinary weapon. "A call that necessitated your presence, you say?" Doyne's repeated her words. "You mean that there is a reason for you to have come in person?" "Of course there is. However, since it is not something that should be discussed out here, please lead the way inside," Christina requested. Soon enough, following Doyne's lead, the elders and Gilead turned around and headed back inside. Accompanied by her paladins, Christina trailed after the elders, but for some reason she suddenly stopped walking and turned her head toward Eugene and the others. Eugene and Christina's gazes collided in mid-air. Christina stared at Eugene for a few moments before showing a faint smile. Her eyes also seemed to curve into smiles as she did so. Even in this, she resembled a niece. Eugene stood there blankly for a few moments, unable to take his eyes off of Christina. "Have you two met before?" As Christina walked away, Seal poked her elbow into Eugene's side and questioned him in a low voice. "Nope," Eugene replied. "Then why did she look so happy to see you?" "How should I know? She might have been smiling at me instead," Cyan muttered in a low voice. Then, in a pointless gesture that only confirmed the obvious, he lifted an arm, sniffed his own armpit, and with an anxious expression on his face, whispered, "Do I really smell that bad?" Eugene confirmed it. "Yep, it kinda smells like dog's shit that's been left out in the rain." "Then could she have turned to look at me because she caught the smell?" Cyan trailed off in dread. "If that was the case, then why would she have been smiling?" Eugene pointed out. Cyan muttered despondently, "She might have been smiling to keep herself from frowning at such an important time." Eugene didn't feel the need to reply. That evening, after Cyan had left to find a bed to pass out in, Eugene was finishing up his dinner alone. "Young master." A servant approached Eugene as he was sipping some tea to refresh his mouth. "A guest has come looking for you." "A guest? Who? Is it Lord Genos?" Eugene asked with a curious tilt of his head as he set down his teacup. He couldn't think of any other guest who would come looking for him at a time like this. Apart from Genos, that was. However, the servant shook his head with a stiff expression on his face. He replied, "No, sir. It is Auxiliary Bishop Christina." "What?" Eugene asked in surprise as he rose from his seat, recalling the saint candidate who had looked at him with a smile in her eyes. "Pleased to meet you, I am Christina Rodriguez." Christina introduced herself, having already entered the hall leading into his quarters. After taking in the slight smile that she wore on her face, Eugene bowed his head slightly and greeted her. "I am Eugene Lionheart. May I ask why the sudden visit?" Christina hadn't brought any of her escorts into his quarters with her and was completely undefended. However, Eugene sensed presences making themselves blatantly known from outside his quarters. These were the paladins of Uras. Unlike regular knights, these paladins were able to control both mana and divine power at the same time. Since they were deemed strong enough to escort a saint candidate, I'm sure that they must be quite skilled, Eugene estimated. Under ordinary circumstances he might have been interested in seeing how strong the paladins really were, but for now he could only set that aside. Eugene first had to deal with Christina, who was openly staring at him. Although he had already sensed this when he had caught sight of her from afar, Christina's face truly resembled that of Anis's. Eugene suspected she might really be Anis's descendant. As far as the world was aware, Anis hadn't left behind any descendants. Although this was partially due to the fact that Anis had been labeled a saint, the Anis that Eugene was familiar with was never the type to unconditionally follow the church's doctrines. She had even drunk alcohol while calling it holy water, so it was entirely possible that she might have secretly had a descendant without anyone knowing about it. That said, it wasn't like he could suddenly ask Christina, who was still just a stranger, about her ancestry. So for now Eugene just asked, "Is there something that you need from me?" Although Eugene had been treating her politely, Out of consideration for the fact that they were still strangers, it seemed that Christina had no intention of following suit. "Please pardon me," Christina apologized as she reached out her hand and grabbed Eugene by the wrist. "What is she trying to do?" Eugene couldn't help but feel slightly flustered. Although Eugene had predicted Christina's movements in advance, he couldn't figure out the reason behind her actions. Soon, a tingling electric current began flowing from where she was gripping his wrist. Eugene's brows furrowed at this, but he didn't try to pull himself free of Christina's hands. Christina was still looking up at Eugene with a wide smile on her face. "Are you done?" Eugene asked after a few moments had passed. The tingling sensation spreading from his wrist had stopped. Yet even so, Christina was still holding on to it. After fiddling with Eugene's wrist, she boldly ran her eyes up Eugene's forearm. "Is there a reason why you just did that?" Eugene demanded. "Your forearm seems quite strong," Christina commented. Eugene raised an eyebrow. "I'm hoping that you're not just touching me because you wanted to feel me up. I heard that you personally faced the Demon King of Incarceration," Christina finally explained before letting go of Eugene's wrist with a nod. "Having come face to face with a Demon King, there was a risk that your mind and soul may have been tainted with his demonic power." "And so, was my mind and soul tainted by the Demon King?" Eugene asked, confident of the answer. "Not at all," Christina said. "They're both completely clean without a trace of contamination." Eugene snorted. Back then, the Demon King of Incarceration had descended upon the site using the Death Knight's body as his vessel. Although he might not have been so certain of this had the Demon King of Incarceration decided to come out in person, there was no way that Eugene's soul was so weak that it would be tainted after facing just that. Eugene got back to the main point. "So did you come here just because you were worried about me?" "Though that was part of it, I was also curious about you," Christina admitted. Eugene smirked. "It seems that rumors of my exploits have even spread to the Holy Empire." "Rumors are rumors, but I have also received a revelation," Christina said as she looked up into Eugene's face. "A revelation?" Eugene asked uncertainly. "Yes." "What kind of revelation?" "I'm afraid that it would be difficult for me to reveal that to you, Sir Eugene, as you have not yet converted to our faith. If you can't even tell me what it says, why tease me by making me aware that it exists?" Eugene complained. "I just wanted to make you aware that God had given his blessing to our meeting," Katrina declared piously. "God?" Eugene's face twisted into a deep scowl. He should have known. If there was any being capable of delivering a revelation to this saint in front of him, it had to be the God of Light, who all of Ura's worshipped. However, Eugene definitely couldn't just accept these words at face value. Even someone like Anise had never once received a divine revelation. Thus, to a certain extent, Anise's participation in Vermouth's journey was done at the will of the Holy Empire, not at the will of their God. "Have you finished your business with me?" Eugene eventually inquired. "Not at all," Christina said, shaking her head. She reached out her hand once more to grab Eugene by the wrist. "The meeting held at the round table is finally over. Since the elders of the council have decided to open the door to the tomb, let us visit the tomb together." "Will you also be entering the tomb, Auxiliary Bishop Christina?" Eugene asked in surprise. "Yes, that is why I came here in person," Christina explained. Eugene voiced his suspicions. "Is this also because of the revelation?" "Yes," Christina replied with a smile. Eugene definitely couldn't tell what Christina's true intentions were, and once again this fact reminded him of Anise. Since Christina was the one who had taken liberties with him first, Eugene decided that there was no need to be so polite with her. "Would it be all right for me to ask you a question?" Eugene spoke up as Christina led him down the hallway. "Auxiliary Bishop Katrina, I have heard that you are currently the only candidate for the position of the saint. Is that because you have inherited the legacy of the saint through your bloodline?" "Your question sure is quite sudden," Katrina responded. Ignoring her evasiveness, Eugene continued. "I have been studying magic for the past 2 years in Akron. Auxiliary Bishop Christina may not be aware of this, but within Lady Sienna's hall, there is a place where she left behind the images of her comrades from 300 years ago." These words caused Christina's steps to falter for a few moments. As her eyes narrowed into a thin smile, she turned around to look at Eugene. In response to her silent smile, Eugene just grinned and said, "This of course include my ancestor, the great Vermouth, as well as the brave Mullen, the stupid Hamel, and the faithful Anise." I was able to see all of their appearances. How fortunate for you, Katrina said drily. Eugene got to the point. There, I happened to get a good look at Lady Anice's face. I'm not sure how you'll take this, but you just so happen to greatly resemble Lady Anice, Auxiliary Bishop Katrina. Although that comes as quite a surprise, I am grateful for your words, Christina said as she let go of Eugene's hand and bowed her head deeply. For you to have seen a resemblance to the Lady Saintess from long ago in this servant, I, who have yet to graduate from being a mere candidate. Perhaps this too may be due to a miracle from God. Can a mere facial resemblance really be called a miracle? Eugene questioned doubtfully. Instead of answering Eugene's question, Christina continued, perhaps Lady Anice may even be my ancestor. If that is the case, that would be quite amazing. Though I've heard that Lady Anice didn't leave behind any descendants, Eugene pointed out. Though that may be what the world believes, beneath the title of a saint even Lady Anice was still only human, so she may have desired descendants, Christina argued. How much do you know about me, Sir Eugene? I'm aware that you are Cardinal Rogeris's adopted daughter, Eugene replied. Yes. I was abandoned as an infant by my birth parents. My parents, whose very names are lost to me, placed me in a basket and discarded me at the door of a monastery, in the hopes that the priests of the God of Light would take me in. Christina reached out once more and caught Eugene's wrist in her hand. Because of that, I know nothing about my bloodline or about my ancestors. However, since Sir Eugene claims that he can see a resemblance to the faithful Anice in my features, then I really do suspect that she might be my ancestor, said Christiana with a giggle. If that really is the case, then it would be truly fortuitous and amazing, but it would also be slightly distressing. From what Sir Eugene has said, if I really am the descendant of Anice, wouldn't that mean that one of parents was still unable to care for their own child despite also being a descendant of Anice? Eugene wasn't sure what to say to this, so he just shrugged his shoulders. He didn't miss the reaction that Christina had shown when she had first heard him say that she resembled Anice. Christina hadn't seemed overly flustered, as if she had heard it many times before. Once he had given it some thought, Eugene realized that there was no way that Anice's appearance would have gone unrecorded by the Holy Empire. Just like what Eugene had felt upon seeing Christina, the priests of the Holy Empire must have also sensed a resemblance to Anice's appearance in Christina. How many children were left abandoned in front of a monastery each year? For an abandoned child like her to have caught the eye of a cardinal, there must have been some kind of reason behind it. Eugene decided not to continue asking questions about her relationship to Anice. Perhaps that snake-like woman really had started a family without anyone knowing about it, even as she went around as a saint. Maybe she had even started a family while wandering around on her pilgrimage. That was all up to Anice. But what was clear was that it couldn't be the least bit pleasant to keep bothering Christina, who might not even be Anice's descendant, about it. The night air sure is cold, Eugene muttered as he pulled out a thick robe from within the cloak of darkness and handed it to Christina. No matter how cold the night air was, it wasn't like Christina was incapable of making her own preparations to handle the cold. Eugene was also well aware of this, but the offer was still meaningful as the act communicated his goodwill to her. Thank you very much, Christina said with a faint smile as she took the robe and wrapped it around her body. She didn't feel the need to turn down Eugene's goodwill. Are we heading to the tower with the round table? Eugene finally asked. Nope, Christina replied. As the closed door to his quarters swung open, the paladins waiting outside his quarters bowed to Christina. Then they raised their bowed heads and eyed Eugene, but that was all that they did. The paladins did not move to follow Eugene and Christina as they left. Christina revealed once they were in private, "We will be heading to the back of the castle." Then she pulled up the hood of her cloak and led the way forward. Chapter 84. Christina Rogeris 2. Gold strands of hair escaped from her hood and shook in the air as Christina walked beneath the moonlight. Eugene stared at Christina's back as he followed her. Every dragon has a reverse scale. 1. Although she hadn't shown anything on the surface, when he had mentioned Anice earlier, Christina's smile had faltered slightly. Eugene licked his lips as he felt his heart pounding from the tension. I'm sorry, Eugene decided to apologize for now. At this, Christina, who was still walking ahead of him, shrugged her shoulders and laughed. What's with the sudden apology? It's just, well, Eugene hesitated. I think I might have been a bit too careless with my earlier question. There's no need to feel that way. Weren't you just asking because you don't know me very well, Sir Eugene? Having seen Lady Anice's appearance, it was only natural for you to have some doubts about me, Christina said as she turned her head slightly to look back at Eugene. Also, don't you have quite a lot of interest in the heroes from 300 years ago, Sir Eugene? That only makes it more understandable that you would have such questions. A lot of interest? Eugene repeated curiously. There are a lot more people paying attention to you than you seem to be aware of. As the foster child of the main family, that alone would have made you stand out, but your talents, Sir Eugene, are such that even Aratha's highbrow tower masters were forced to recognize you, no? Christina asked as she looked forward once more. As she regained her previous speed, she continued talking. While Hagani may be part of Nahama's territory, it has also been designated as a holy site by the Holy Empire. Every year many believers make a pilgrimage to that holy site. Naturally, this means that the Holy Empire has many eyes watching that holy land. Eugene silently processed this. Katrina confessed, it might be unpleasant for you to hear this, but I was already informed of what you were up to during your stay in Hagani. That's not enough to piss me off. I had already noticed that I was receiving a lot of attention while I was in Hagani, Eugene replied with a snort. Eugene and Layman had stayed together in Hagani for less than a week. In that short span of time, Eugene had indeed felt a great number of eyes watching him. There hadn't been any hostility in those gazes, so he hadn't bothered to evade them. Since there had also been that matter with Amelia Merwin hanging over his head, Eugene hadn't wanted to kick up a fuss and draw her attention. As such, he had left his watchers alone, but he had kept up constant vigilance while their gazes were directed at him. From the priests who had prayed to the statue of Anis, to the believers in the God of Light who carried the cross, the symbol of their god, around their necks or wrists, and even the knife-laden warriors of Nahama. The way that the Holy Empire has been paying attention to me, is that also because of the revelation? Eugene inquired. Pardon me for repeating what I said earlier, but I am afraid that I cannot reveal anything to you as you are not a member of our faith, Katrina repeated her refusal. I remember that, but I really can't help but be curious about it, Eugene complained. I informed you about it because I hoped that it would arouse your curiosity, Katrina cheekily admitted. She's got a nasty personality, Eugene thought as his face twisted into a scowl. Not only did her face resemble Anis, Christina's wretched personality also reminded him of his old companion. Could Katrina really be Anis's descendant? It would be jumping to conclusions to decide that Christina is Anis's descendant just because of a resemblance between their faces and personalities. In the first place, wouldn't it be strange for Anis's descendant to so closely resemble her after a whole 300 years have passed? Currently, there was no descendant in the Lionheart clan's main family whose face resembled that of Vermouth's. The only resemblance that could be seen between the ancestor and his descendants was in their gray hair and golden eyes. Perhaps it was just a coincidence that Christina's face resembled Anis's. Blonde hair and blue eyes were a fairly common pairing. In fact, her facial features and appearance weren't exactly identical to Anis's. To put it bluntly, it was the characteristics and the aura of a saint that had played no small part in reminding Eugene of Anis. However, it was true that their looks were similar. That could be why she had been taken in by the cardinal in the first place, so that he could raise her as a copy of the saint. The more Eugene thought about it, the more complicated he felt. Anis hadn't talked much about her past. In fact, she hadn't been the only one. Aside from Molan and Sienna, neither Hamel nor Vermouth had enjoyed bringing up stories from their pasts. However, Anis's attitude towards her past had been different from that of Hamel or Vermouth. Anis hated her past. Although she had never said so directly, Eugene, no, Hamel had gotten that feeling from her. They had traveled together for a very long time after all. While going through all sorts of hardships, they had shared a lot of talk about this or that. Bringing up memories was a simple way to pass the time, and it was good to talk about them over drinks. Sienna would rave about how beautiful the elven forest where she had spent her childhood was. And whenever she brought this topic up, Molan also seemed to be unwilling to lose to her, as he would brag about how magnificent the northern snowfields where his tribe lived were. Whenever they started talking like that, Vermouth and Hamel preferred to pick holes in the other stories rather than tell their own stories. Just like Hamel, Vermouth has also lost everything he had to the demon folk. As for Anis, unlike them, she hadn't lost her hometown. After all, she had been born in the Holy Empire, Uraz. Even now, after 300 years had passed, it was a powerful country that still reigned strong as one of the three empires. Even so, Anise strangely seemed to hold no desire to talk about the Holy Empire. She spoke about the God of Light several times, but she barely said anything about the cardinals of the Holy Empire who had been involved in raising her. Hamel didn't know what it had been like for Anise, growing up in the Holy Empire. However, considering her silence and the way her smile would have a different twist to it from her usual look, and when he thought about how Anise had become Vermouth's comrade, it wasn't difficult to imagine that being a saint was quite a shitty position to be in. Anise was able to become Vermouth's comrade, all because the Holy Empire had ordered her to do so. The reason why Anise had joined Vermouth's journey and had gone on his mission to save the world was simply that it was the will of the Holy Empire and of her God that she do so. The path continues down there, Christina informed him as she came to a halt. The two of them had arrived at the rear of the Black Lion Castle and were now standing in front of a cliff, the bottom of which could be seen far below. Eugene walked up next to Christina and looked down at the bottom of the cliff. The first thing that came into view was the forest below. In the mountain ridges beyond the forest, they could see wyverns and other flying monsters soaring through the sky. How far down? Eugene asked cautiously. I don't know the exact location, but we should be able to spot it as we're falling, Christina assured him. Ashish, Eugene let out a sigh as he shook his head. So what you're saying is that, without taking any safety measures, our next step is just to throw ourselves off the cliff? It isn't like you'll be falling alone, right, Sir Eugene? Christina encouraged him. Eugene checked. Do you know how to use flight magic, auxiliary Bishop Christina? Of course I know how to use it, Christina said with a wide grin as she offered her hand to Eugene. Eugene narrowed his eyes and stared at her hand in confusion. What are you doing? Since we're going to the same place anyway, there's no need for us to fall separately, no? Christina proposed cheerfully. Really now? Shaking his head in exasperation, Eugene took Christina's hand. Then Christina immediately pulled Eugene with her as she threw herself off the cliff. Clicking his tongue at her daring behavior, Eugene pulled in his cloak that was flapping in the wind and wrapped it tightly around his body. After a while he thought to himself, could it be that we need to fall all the way to the bottom? The fall was long enough that Eugene couldn't help but consider this question. At some point Christina had gotten closer to Eugene as if she were asking to be embraced. Eugene, who had still been staring at the ground far below, turned his gaze towards Christina. Instead of looking at the ground, Christina was staring straight at Eugene. As their eyes met, Christina smiled at him with just her eyes. She extended one of her fingers and poked Eugene in the chest. If we die from falling like this, do you think we will go to heaven? Christina asked teasingly. Did you trick me into falling because you wanted to lead me into heaven? Eugene returned the question. Don't you want to go to heaven, Sir Eugene? I do want to go there eventually, but I don't want to leave for heaven already. If that's the case, then it seems that I won't be able to accompany you there. Christina giggled and pulled out the wand she carried at her waist. The blue jewel embedded in the center of the wand's cross emitted a dazzling light. The blinding light immediately engulfed Eugene and Christina, forming a pair of large wings. Eugene felt warmth coming from the light surrounding him. This light was divine power. A holy magic spell, the Wings of Light. It was one of the divine spells that Anise had most enjoyed using. Eugene turned his head to look behind him. Eugene gasped. For a moment there, Eugene saw the figure of an angel with its wings spread open. Its appearance was so majestic and divine that even Eugene, who didn't believe in gods, was shocked. At the same time, it conveyed to him a strong sense of dread. This wasn't his first time seeing an angel. 300 years ago, Anise had summoned angels several times through the use of high-level divine magic. However, the angel he had seen back then had a different appearance from the one he was seeing right now. The current angel had its eyes closed and a benevolent smile on its face. Its face was also exactly identical to that of Anise's, to the point where it gave him goosebumps. Soon he could no longer see the angel's figure. The majestic wings of light slowed their fall and then wrapped themselves around Eugene and Christina. Eugene gaped wordlessly for a few moments, before his face twisted into a frown. What was that just now? Eugene asked. What are you talking about? Christina asked in turn. Just now, that angel, Eugene faltered. Christina tilted her head in confusion at these muttered words. An angel? Sir Eugene, have you been taking any hallucinogens? Eugene wordlessly shook his head. The name of this holy spell is the Wings of Light. It's not the kind of high-level holy spell that can cause an angel to appear. However, since the spell will be able to keep us both safe as we fall from this height, you don't need to worry about any threat to our lives, Christina reassured him. It seemed that Christina suspected that Eugene had seen a vision of an angel because he was worried about falling to his death. Eugene asked no further questions and kept his lips locked up tight. This wasn't the time for questions. Space suddenly distorted. This wasn't a phenomenon caused by the Wings of Light. Surprised by this, Christina unfurled the Wings of Light. The feathers of the wings then scattered into light and disappeared. Thud. Eugene and Christina's feet touched the ground. Eugene suppressed his alarm and took in his surroundings. A few seconds prior, Eugene and Christina had been falling to the bottom of the cliff. But now, let alone the cliff, he couldn't even see the mountains or the forest. They had been drawn into a strange space. The grass in the field below was green and the sky was blue. There was no sun hanging high in the supposed sky, but the sky was blue and bright. There was no wind, but the grass in the field was swaying. Eugene slowly crouched down and tried touching the grass. The feeling he got from touching it was no different from that of real grass, but at the same time he couldn't feel any presence of life from the grass. It was the same with the soil. So this place was created using spatial magic, Christina muttered, causing Eugene to nod along. Of course, it was impossible to create a subspace of this size with just a simple grasp of magic. One of Akron's floors was dedicated to the Hall of Space. Although Eugene had touched on the highest levels of spatial magic while studying there, among all the spells that he had seen, none of them were able to create a subspace of this size. So, could it have been Vermouth? Eugene speculated. Since Vermouth was also an archwizard comparable to Sienna in skill, Eugene suspected that it would have been possible for Vermouth to create a subspace this large. Eugene rose back to his full height and looked ahead. On the other side of the field lay a beautiful garden. In the center of the flowers, Eugene spotted a white shrine. Though it wasn't just an ordinary shrine. In front of the shrine, a stone statue of Vermouth had been erected. Eugene stared at the statue for a few moments, before walking over to the shrine. As he was drawing close to the shrine, Doynes and Gilead emerged from within, with Doynes asking as soon as he saw them, "Don't you find this place quite beautiful?" Doynes stared at Eugene and Christina with a faint smile on his face. "If it weren't for the need to guard this tomb, I would have left it open for all the members of the Lionheart clan to pay their respects," Doynes admitted. "I'm sure that our ancestor would be happy to receive the honor and respect of his many descendants," Eugene spoke up. So it seems that you share my opinion. However, it was none other than our ancestor himself who created this place. If he had wanted to receive the honor and respect of his descendants, there was no need for him to have built his tomb in such a troublesome-to-reach place like this," Doynes said as he looked up at the statue. About Sir Hamill's statue. I think it would be good for you to place it opposite this one. What do you think?" "I'm sure that Sir Hamill would be satisfied with placing it anywhere here," Eugene replied. "But we also still need to consider whether our ancestor would be satisfied with its placement. I don't think it would be so bad to place it there either. Since this statue of the founder has been on its own for 300 years, I'd like to believe that it would be meaningful to set up a statue of an old friend nearby so that they can stay here together," Doynes said, and then kept his silence for a few moments. So far he had simply been leading the conversation in place of the silent Gilead, but now his gaze turned to Christina before he continued on to more serious matters. In order to open the path leading to this space, it requires both the seal of the Patriarch and the seal of the Council head. These two keys were personally created by our great ancestor, and he also left a message that his tomb should not be entered unless the position of the main family's patriarch is being succeeded or if a new captain of the Knights of the Black Lion is being appointed. "So you're saying that something like this is unprecedented?" Christina spoke up in acknowledgement of the point he was making. She glanced down at the flowers that were swaying at their feet. Just like the grass of the field, the flowers below were only for the sake of appearances and moved with a strange lifeless harmony. She continued, "I also understand why you may want to rebuke my presumptuousness, but I am here for an important purpose, so important that it even excuses subverting such a long-standing tradition. We're just worried that now might not be the best timing for whatever it is you're here for," Gilead spoke up. As long as Lady Christina is following the will of the Holy Empire, how can a mere clan like our Lionheart family disobey the will of a god? Gilead's gaze left Christina and turned to Eugene. His gaze wasn't scolding Eugene, nor was it filled with displeasure from being placed in such a situation. There was only regret and concern for Eugene reflected in his eyes. Gilead didn't want his son to have to be involved in such an unprecedented visitation. Gilead continued, Lady Christina. You have visited us at a time like this, and have stubbornly insisted on accompanying my son in his request to enter our ancestor's tomb. As the patriarch of the Lionheart clan, I have the right to ignore such a presumptuous demand, but I chose not to ignore your request out of consideration for the long-standing alliance between the Holy Empire and our Keel Empire, as well as the friendship that has been passed down from our great ancestors. I too feel the same way. Doynes nodded in approval of Gilead's words. Lady Christina, you told us that you wouldn't be able to inform us of your reason for making this demand until you had entered the tomb. You spoke of a revelation, and that now that the demon king of incarceration has spread his warning to the whole world, the long era of peace is about to be shattered. For a revelation to be given under such circumstances, it must be for something that cannot be ignored. So now that we are here, please release the tight lock that you have kept on your own lips. Then allow me to say this, Christina said as she stepped past Eugene and placed herself in the center of the room. She raised the wand that she had still been holding ever since their entry into this space in front of her chest, and with her other hand she slowly drew her own name in midair. I am Christina Rogerus, the adopted daughter of Cardinal Michael Rogerus, auxiliary bishop of the Alcardi parish, and the only saint candidate in the entire Ura's Holy Empire. From now on, I will be representing the will of the Pope, and I stand here before you as the newly confirmed saint, having received a revelation from the God of Light. Doynes and Gilead's eyes widened at this calm declaration. However, Christina didn't pay attention to their surprise and simply continued, Now then, please open the coffin of the hero. What on earth are you saying? Doynes responded after collecting his wits. The great Vermouth, the hero who ended the era of cruelty by forcing an oath onto the demon king of incarceration, the master of all, our greatest hero. As the founder of the Lionheart clan, he was a flawless person who truly deserved to be called a hero. With there being no other hero who has accomplished deeds as great as Vermouth's, then surely Vermouth should have been the first to enter heaven on his passing before anyone else, Christina declared suggestively. For now, Eugene just kept quiet and listened to Christina speak. Gilead and Doynes were overcome with astonishment, that was quickly giving way to rage, but there was not a single reason for Eugene to feel upset with how things were playing out. On the contrary, this situation was perfect for Eugene. The tomb wasn't just simply sealed away with magic, it was locked up tight, and without the seals that had been divided between the head of He Council and the Patriarch, it would be impossible to open the door to this place. On top of that, Vermouth's tomb wasn't located within a barrier as he had expected, but instead within this subspace. It was absolutely impossible for the current Eugene to forcefully open a door leading to this place. If that was the case, would it be possible for him to do so in the future? Eugene couldn't be sure of an answer. But wasn't Christina now telling them to open Vermouth's coffin all on her own? Having come this far, I'm not sure you understand what you're telling us to do, Doynes said, no longer smiling. All discussion about our ancestor's tomb was already laid to rest over 300 years ago. The Holy Empire canonized our great ancestor as a saint, and formally ceded the Holy Sword to the Lionheart clan as a symbol of their friendship with him. With that, the connection between the Holy Empire and the Lionheart clan became even stronger than before and has developed into a sacred bond. Yes, of course that's the case, Christina agreed with him. In an era of peace, that alone would have been taken as confirmation enough. However, now that the demon king of incarceration has issued his warning, the world is destined to no longer be at peace. And what does that have to do with opening up our ancestor's coffin? Also, what did you mean by prattling on about heaven? Doynes demanded. The great Vermouth's soul has not entered heaven, Christina confirmed as she raised her hand and pointed at Vermouth's statue. In the revelation, it was said that the soul of a hero continues to wander without any rest. That is why I, as the saint, must perform a final check on the hero's remains. Are you aware of how disrespectful your current words are to the Lionheart clan? Gilead ground out slowly, unable to hide his anger. He unconsciously manifested a flaming white mane of mana as he glared at Christina, and beside him, Doins also glared at Christina with narrowed eyes. However, Christina wasn't even the slightest bit hesitant. Instead, she just nodded her head with a heavy smile. "I have no intention of undermining the great hero's many accomplishments," Christina declared. Gilead and Doins remained silent. Christina confidently argued, "Yet instead of mindlessly praising the great hero, we should at least confirm his final moments. We, who are living in this world 300 years after the last war finally ended, are not able to fully understand the events that occurred during that era. Just why did such a great hero have to be laid to rest so quickly? Why did the wise Sienna go into seclusion so suddenly, and then why did the faithful Anise disappear during her pilgrimage? Why has the brave Molan not a period in this world since 100 years ago?" Christina resumed walking forward. Crossing the field of flowers, she approached Doins and Gilead as she continued her diatribe. Why didn't the heroes defeat the remaining demon kings? What kind of oath was made between the demon king of incarceration and the great Vermouth? I'm afraid that we don't know anything about it. Not even God knows what occurred at that moment. All he can say is that the soul of the hero has not entered heaven. That is why we should at least check the tomb in order to lay our suspicions to rest. Would rejecting your request be going against the will of your God? Doins demanded. We have no desire to enforce the authority of our faith on those who don't believe in him, nevertheless in this case yes. As a believer in our God, I would feel a great disappointment at your rejection, Christina confessed. Even back then with Anise, Eugene had this thought several times that it was a damned annoying reasoning to claim that it was all God's will. No matter what you said in response, after they had put forward that it was the will of their God, they no longer needed any other reason to keep pushing through what they had decided to do. As a believer, their God's will was absolute. To those who didn't believe in their God, their words might sound like bullshit, but it was also hard to just disregard their revelations when the believers placed so much faith in them. How lucky, Eugene silently cheered. Now, of course, there was no reason for Eugene to get involved in this troublesome matter. As he tried not to show any obvious interest in the outcome, he kept watching this situation unfold with as stiff a face as he could manage to hold. What in the world are your reasons for involving my son in this confirmation of yours? Gilead demanded. That is also part of the revelation, but I'm afraid that I cannot say any more on that just yet. Christina regretfully excused herself. Gilead's tone grew snide. Saint Christina, do you really understand just how ridiculous and offensive you're revealing yourself to be? That may be, but this is all the will of God as well as the will of His Holiness the Pope, Christina defended herself. 3. She absolutely refuses to lose the argument, Eugene noted. Anise was just like that. Eugene stared at Christina's back, gobsmacked at her stubbornness. A confirmation, you say, Doins muttered. He tightened his hands into fists for a moment before loosening them, then he turned to glance at Gilead and said, I will follow the Patriarch's decision in this. Are you sure? Gilead asked in surprise. Even though I am in a position that requires me to lead the Council of Elders, I still can't take over for the Patriarch when it comes to deciding such issues. However, as head of the Council, while I will unconditionally abide by the decision made by the Patriarch, I will never allow it to develop into a problem in the future, Doins vowed. Gilead was silent for a few moments as he lost himself in thought. Eventually he let out a long sigh and then grinned bravely. I never imagined that I would actually get to open our ancestor's coffin with my own hands, Gilead muttered as he turned around and walked away. Please follow me. Chapter 85. Christina Rogerus, 3. Doins did not enter the shrine along with the others. How could someone like me, who isn't even the Patriarch, dare to examine the remains of our great ancestor? Doins said. He shook his head while releasing a long sigh, then he bowed his head toward Christina. Egwene didn't say anything useless and just quietly stuck to Christina's side. After having come this far, there's no way that they'll turn to me and give me some bullshit about not being allowed to accompany them in, right? Eugene told himself this, but he still decided that it was best to be cautious. So far things had worked out quite well for him. If he was kicked out now, right at the most important moment, he would no longer just stop at having no faith in God. Eugene would be actively hostile to the divine being. While he was entertaining such thoughts, Eugene glanced at Gilead's back. He thought with some concern, it must be very stressful for him. The memory from earlier of Gilead angrily defending the safety of Eugene as if he was Gilead's real son, lingered in Eugene's mind. Since Eugene already had Gerhard, he couldn't really think of Gilead as his father. However, he acknowledged the fact that Gilead was a good person, and he had sensed a lot of concern and fatherly love coming from Gilead. That was why he couldn't help but feel that Gilead was in a very pitiful position. The eldest son had smeared shit all over the face of his father and his clan, and now a saint who had come to visit was stubbornly insisting on opening up their ancestor's grave. Becoming a patriarch? Like how I would do that? Absolutely never, Eugene swore as he felt a shudder run down his back. Setting aside his pity and any other emotions, Eugene reaffirmed his decision once more. If he was forced to join the Knights of the Black Lion instead, he could deal with it, but he absolutely couldn't bear becoming the patriarch. No, he didn't even want to become a Knight of the Black Lion either. Eugene just wanted to live his life the way he wanted to. What a mysterious place. Having been following Gilead silently, Christina suddenly spoke up. A subspace of this size. It has a sky and a field, flowers, and even a shrine. Although it all looks gorgeous at first glance, the appearances are only skin deep. In fact, there seem to be no decorations within the shrine either. That was the will of our great ancestor, Gilead admitted in a quiet voice. He forbade all of his descendants from decorating his tomb, and he also forbade the Lionheart clan as a whole from adding any ornamentation. He also told us that we are not to worship his tomb, nor use it as a symbol of our respect for him. Worship and a symbol, Christina muttered. It seemed that he truly wanted to avoid becoming an idol. Normally, even the statue of Sir Hamel would not be allowed to be placed here. However, strictly speaking, it's not a decoration arranged by his descendants, nor is it an ornament arranged by the Lionheart clan. Gilead paused for a moment and looked back at Eugene. After all, the fact that Eugene is a disciple of the wise Sienna takes precedence over his identity as one of Vermouth's descendants. Also, as the last to pay tribute to Sir Hamel's grave, my son has inherited the right to decide what to do with the recovered artifacts. That is the decision that the council and I have come to on this matter. What a beautiful compromise, Christina said with a bright smile. The atmosphere around the three was still chilly, but she smiled without any sign of restraint. To think that a friendship from 300 years ago would be resurrected here. To think that Hamel's grave was lost to the entire world. For Sir Eugene to have found his way into the grave, it surely must have been God's will, Christina confidently stated. Was the fact that Sir Hamel's grave was damaged and his body desecrated in order to create a Death Knight also part of God's will? Eugene asked with a bitter expression. At this snide response, Christina slowly shook her head and replied, "Of course that was not God's will. That was why he used you as a ray of light to illuminate the darkness lurking so deep underground." What amazing leaps of logic. Eugene just snorted and shook his head. Anise had been just as blatant as Christina in using her God as her excuse for anything. Even so, I was never once able to win an argument with her, Eugene complained to himself. Could shitty logic and stubborn rhetoric be the basic skills taught to all clergy? For now, Eugene couldn't help but assume that this was the case, having seen such examples in both Anise and Christina. It does look pretty shabby, Eugene noted as his eyes roamed around the interior of the shrine. Just like Christina had said, while the shrine seemed very grand on the outside, it was pretty shabby on the inside. There weren't any of the common murals or paintings that usually decorated shrine walls, and no patterns had been engraved onto any of the pillars. Eugene felt that something like this better suited Vermouth's personality than something extravagant. Then he recalled Hamel's grave, which had already crumbled into ruins. Before it had been demolished, it looked to have been a pretty decent grave. There had been a statue and even a memorial stone dedicated to Hamel. The pillars and walls had also been carved with Anise's prayers and Sienna's magic formations. However, this shrine had absolutely no decoration. There weren't even any prayers written down, and he couldn't see a memorial stone either. On the stone statue of Vermouth that stood in front of the throne, the only thing engraved below the statue in an impersonal handwriting was his own name, Vermouth Lionheart. Vermouth Lionheart. The handwriting that this name had been written in matched Vermouth's handwriting from Eugene's memories. Recalling what was written on the stone in Hamel's grave. Vermouth had to have written the name on his tombstone with his own hands. Eugene had a hard time imagining what that had felt like. "Wait here for a few moments," Gilead instructed as he came to a halt. Within the shrine, a white coffin had been placed right in the center. After staring at the coffin for a few moments, Gilead slowly knelt down. Although Gilead didn't tell him to follow suit, Eugene also got onto his knees. He was paying his respects not to his ancestor, but to his deceased comrade, an old friend. Eugene felt a complicated feeling stir within him as he closed his eyes and bowed his head. Christina was also doing the same thing. She had gently gotten down onto her knees and placed her hands together in front of her chest in a prayer. For a brief moment, all three of them spent some time paying their respects to the deceased. After a while, Gilead was the first to rise. As he tried to quell the feelings that surged within him, Gilead turned towards Christina. "Come closer," Gilead instructed. Eugene slowly got up and raised his head as Gilead and Christina approached the coffin. His heart was pounding from the tension. Eugene couldn't believe that he would truly be able to check the contents of Vermouth's coffin so soon. "Please," Eugene pleaded sincerely. "Just, please be lying peacefully inside the coffin. Whether it's an intact corpse or a mummy, whether it's rotted into a mess or only the bones are left, just about anything would be fine. As long as your corpse is still lying here." If Vermouth really was lying in his coffin, then Eugene could finally be relieved of these suspicions that he couldn't bear to believe were true. Who was the one who had placed the moonlight sword in Hamel's grave? The one who had clashed with Sienna in the process of doing so? The one who had made some stupid fucking promise with the Demon King of Incarceration? "I'm opening it now," Gilead nervously declared. If Vermouth really had passed away and was lying in there, that alone would be enough to give Eugene some peace of mind. Even if Vermouth had been involved in his reincarnation, that wasn't something that Eugene could really blame him for. However, what if Vermouth truly was the one who had fought with Sienna, a comrade with whom they had both gone through so many hardships, and had forced Sienna to have no choice but to retreat? Then, there was how that motherfucker Incarceration had talked about being friendly with Vermouth. If the person that the Demon King had flapped his lips about and acted like he was in a close relationship with really was Vermouth, then Eugene definitely wouldn't be able to accept it. He wouldn't even try to accept it. He wouldn't want to understand it. And he wouldn't be able to understand even if he wanted to. Because it was him, then Vermouth couldn't be allowed to do something like that. If it were anyone else, then they shouldn't do that either, but Vermouth he especially, definitely couldn't be allowed to do something like that. The Demon King Slayer. The hero. God's chosen. The god of war. The masterful. The great Vermouth. He definitely couldn't be. As expected, Christina let out a long sigh as she saw the contents of the coffin. Gilead staggered backward in shock. Eugene finally closed his intensely stinging eyes. Blood dripped down from his tight fists. He unclenched his fists once, then clenched them again to stop the blood from dripping and hide the wounds. "There's nothing inside here," Christina voiced the obvious. Prick. It sounded like Eugene's molars were about to shatter under the strain. But at the moment, Eugene felt like he wouldn't care even if they did shatter. Without any regard for the clan or for proper etiquette, he wanted to tear down this shrine and smash it into pieces. No, he just didn't want to stay here any longer. Since 300 years have passed, it's possible that not even the body was left, Gilead croaked out in a trembling voice. From his tone, they could feel that even he wasn't confident in what he was saying. "I have heard stories where the remains of holy figures sublimated and disappeared," Christina conceded as she looked down into the empty coffin. "However, if that truly was the case, then the soul of the great Vermouth should have already entered heaven." Gilead was silent in the face of this cogent argument. "At the very least, what we can be certain about is that Sir Vermouth was not laid to rest here," Christina stated firmly. Gilead's eyes wavered. His lips flapped soundlessly, unsure of what to say, and his gaze kept switching between looking at the empty coffin and at Christina's face. Eventually Gilead managed to squeeze out the words, "Are you saying that our ancestor didn't die and instead just disappeared? Although I don't know what his reasons were for doing so at the moment, I have no choice but to assume that," Christina said as she turned around. Without any trace of amusement on her face, she gazed up at the ceiling for a few moments. When her lips parted once more, she called out a name. "Eugene Lionheart." Eugene opened and closed his blood-stained fists again, then raised his head to look at Christina. He had already guessed that this would be the result of their check. He hadn't wanted to believe it was true, But there were too many events involving Eugene that couldn't have been possible without Vermouth having been behind them. Hamel's keepsake left in the main family's treasure house, Sienna defeated, the moonlight sword stored in Hamel's grave. All of these things couldn't have been done without Vermouth's involvement. The problem was, why had he done these things? If his sole purpose was to reincarnate Hamel, there was no reason for Vermouth to have kept such secrecy. They were Sienna, Anise and Molyn. If Vermouth had just explained the situation to them, even if they didn't understand what he was doing, they would have at least accepted it. But Vermouth hadn't done that. What was even more damning was the fact that the Demon King of Incarceration knew about Hamel's reincarnation, while his own comrades probably had no clue. All of these discoveries made Eugene feel like shit. He tried his best to control his emotions and stopped his killing intent from leaking. However, he had no attention to spare for his facial expression. His face felt awkward and unfamiliar to him, as if he was wearing a mask. Unconsciously, Eugene reached up and touched his own cheek. His blood, which had yet to dry up, was smeared across his cheek. "Allow me to disclose the rest of the revelation," Christina continued speaking. "Eugene Lionheart, from this moment on, I declare you to be the successor of the great Vermouth and our next hero." "What the hell?" "This declaration is made by the will of the God of Light, who has sent down his revelation, and it has also been recognized by His Holiness the Pope. As the Demon King of Incarceration has yet to take any action other than a warning, we cannot announce this to the world, but I am to accompany you as Saint of the Holy Empire and Witness of the Light," Katrina proclaimed one-sidedly. Was she talking about now? Eugene snorted and glared at Christina. Gilead was unable to hide his surprise as his gaze shifted between Eugene and Christina. "The next hero? What in the world do you?" Gilead trailed off in confusion. At a time like this, when the Demon King of Incarceration has issued such a warning, Sir Eugene's existence is by no means a coincidence, Christina stated confidently. These words rang a huge alarm bell in Gilead's chest. This was embarrassing to admit, but Gilead had also thought the same thing at several points. Eugene Lionheart, the son that he had adopted 6 years ago, was so amazing that his accomplishments were unrivaled in the 300 years of history of the Lionheart clan. This isn't part of God's revelation, but I believe that Sir Eugene might even be the reincarnation of Vermouth. Christina held her cross-headed wand tightly in front of her chest as she continued speaking. If that was the case, it would also explain why the great hero's soul has not entered heaven. In order to address the imminent crisis that the world is about to face, the hero's soul has reincarnated itself in the body of his descendant. Haha. Eugene had decided to hear her out, but now he was so perplexed that he couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. If there really was such a thing as fate, then the current Eugene had to be right in the middle of a whirlwind of fate. But so what? Whether this fate was like a whirlwind or a spider's web, did he really need to follow it blindly? Eugene would definitely never be willing to do something like that. He wished that he could meet in person with whatever God of Light who had sent down this revelation. If they were going to throw out such nonsensical bullshit, then they should at least get my permission first. Fucking what? A hero? What a load of bullshit, Eugene cursed. These words didn't just stay in his head, Eugene spat them out for all to hear. And after spilling these words, Eugene didn't gasp in surprise. He had fully intended to say these words out loud. Gilead had a shocked expression on his face, but right now, Eugene hardly gave a damn about his foster father's position on the matter. The great ha ha ha. You're saying that I'm the great Vermouth's reincarnation? Me? Eugene asked incredulously. Hey now, Auxiliary Bishop Christina. No, would that be Saint Christina? Christina blinked but said nothing. Please don't spout such bullshit. On what grounds are you claiming that I'm someone's reincarnation? And what right does your God have? Just how great does he think he is that he picks me, who's doing just fine all on his own, and declares me a hero or whatever without even asking for my consent? Eugene demanded angrily. Christina waited for him to finish before calmly responding. It is just my opinion that Sir Eugene may be the reincarnation of the hero. Even if you are angry at him right now, please do not take my God's revelation lightly. No. In any case, I'm not a believer in the God of Light. I have no intention of converting to him, and I don't have any thoughts about going to heaven, so I'm just going to keep on doing what I already had planned. Eugene insisted with a derisive snort as he shook the blood off of his hands. I'm just me, Eugene Lionheart. If you need a hero to replace my great ancestor, then get someone else to do it. You can just pick someone out of a crowd and call them a hero. If no one really catches your eye, then maybe that almighty and powerful god of yours can descend personally to do the job himself. Sir Eugene, Christina said, protesting his blasphemy. I haven't finished speaking yet. No matter what you've based it on, I have no desire to foolishly claim to be a hero in front of the public. I'm not honored by the offer and I'm not happy with it either. I'm just me and this is my life. I'm going to live my life by doing what I want to do. Spitting out these words, Eugene then turned towards Gilead. I'm very sorry for my harsh words, Lord Patriarch. But I believe that I've made my position clear, so I hope that you can accept my refusal of her offer. Speaking of which, now that it's come up, I have no intention of becoming the Patriarch in place of Sion, and I have no desire to become a member of the Knights of the Black Lion either. That said, I will not do anything that may somehow dishonor the family, nor will I do anything to bring shame to the Patriarch's face. So I hope that you will continue to trust me and support me as you have been doing thus far. I will always respect your decision, Gilead replied after finally overcoming his astonishment. Eugene smiled brightly at these words, and then wiped away the blood smeared across his cheek with the back of his hand. So anyways, Saint Christina, please pass my message on to your almighty God of light, Eugene politely requested. Hesitantly, Christina inquired, what would you like me to say to him? Just this, Eugene said as he held up a hand that was still stained with blood and lifted his middle finger. Also, please tell him that I said fuck you. Having just managed to get over his astonishment, Gilead's jaw dropped in shock once again. Christina just looked at him wide-eyed, unable to say anything in response. Eugene lowered his middle finger and then turned around. As he left, Eugene called back over his shoulder. I've said all I wanted to say and it's late at night, so I'm going to call it quits here and go get some sleep. What about the statue? Gilead asked after collecting himself. Eugene shrugged and laughed. I don't think that Sir Hamel would want to stay at a place where his friend never actually rested. Both the statue and the memorial stone, he didn't want to leave them at a place like this. Chapter 86. Christina Rogerus 4. Eugene didn't stop to look back. He walked straight out of the shrine, approaching Doynes, who was standing in front of the statue of Vermouth. If I want to get out of here, what do I need to do? Eugene asked. Doynes put on a puzzled expression at these abrupt words. He shot a gaze towards the shrine, searching for Gilead and Christina, who had yet to appear, and then turned back to face Eugene. What about Sir Hamel's statue? Doynes eventually asked. There's no longer any need to leave it here, Eugene answered. Ha! Doynes' expression froze as he heard this, unable to tell what Eugene meant by this. Unsure of what to say, he hesitated for a few moments before letting out a long sigh and acquiescing. Just keep heading straight. If you do that, you'll naturally be able to make your way outside. Eugene nodded. Got it, thank you very much. Then I'll be heading out first. Could you tell me why you're so angry? Doynes' words caught Eugene just before he could leave. The coffin was missing their ancestors' remains. Doynes could at least figure out that much, but he did not fully understand why Eugene would be so angry. Under normal circumstances, Eugene would have reacted to these words more calmly, but right now he was in a state of such heightened emotion that he couldn't find the patience for that. I don't think I have an obligation to explain the reason for my anger, now do I? Eugene replied insolently. He didn't even wait for a reply, he simply walked straight past Doynes and through the flower field. Doynes' eyes blinked in shock as he looked at Eugene's back, then he shook his head as he let out a long sigh. Eugene felt like dog's hit. Lately he'd been encountering a whole lot of things that made him feel this way. Like in the underground grave in Nahama, when he had discovered that Hamel's corpse had been made into a death knight. Or when Amelia Merwin had been about to kill him. There was also the whole thing where the Demon King of Incarceration had shown up in person. When the Demon King had spoke of his fondness for Vermouth, and when he had snidely called Eugene a stupid lion, revealing that the Demon King was aware of his reincarnation. But even compared to back then, his current state was even more dog's hit awful, motherfucking dog's hit awful. Eugene bit down hard on his lower lip and chewed angrily. He could taste blood coming from his shredded lip, but the throbbing pain wasn't nearly enough to shake off this dog's hit feeling. He wanted to run off into the woods like a madman. To find a monster or a demonic beast, no, anything would do. If he beat something to death with just his bare hands, would it make this mood of his feel a little better? No. He didn't even need to try something like that to know that it wouldn't be any fun at all, and that it wouldn't make him feel any better either. In the end, it would only vent his rage for a short while. Unless he could somehow address the root of the problem that was souring his emotions, he wouldn't be able to get rid of this damn feeling. As such, he just kept recklessly walking ahead. Although the body he had been reincarnated to was still only 19 years old, Eugene still perfectly retained the memories of his previous self, which had gone through all kinds of experiences. Thanks to that, he didn't want to pointlessly take his anger out on anyone, and he was able to exert control over his boiling emotions all by himself. It was just like Doins had said. After passing through the flower fields and then walking across the field, at some point, Eugene found himself standing in the middle of a dark forest. The cold wind blew around him. Eugene slowly raised his head and looked up at the heavens. He could see the night sky through the lush foliage. The night sky over the Uklas Mountains was full of stars. It was such a beautiful night sky that it made the fact that he still felt like shit even more of a shame. As Eugene glared up at the heavens, his boiling emotions began to slowly cool. However, he was still panting in rage. Just as he was about to shout or scream loud enough to tear apart his own throat, he stopped himself and settled for the understatement of the century. "This stinks." Eugene took a deep breath and then raised his fists. His fists were still covered in blood. When he spread his fingers, he saw that his palms were covered in ragged cuts. Eugene began taking large strides as he tore off the places where the blood had scabbed against his skin. After walking for a bit, he started to resent the fact that this forest had far too many trees. Although it was only natural that a forest would have many trees, right now, Eugene couldn't accept such a natural fact. As such, he struck at one of the trees with his blood-stained fists. He didn't use any mana and simply struck the tree with only his strength, but the tree was knocked down. Eugene glanced down at his stiff fist. The blood that had just finished clotting was starting to slowly pour down once more. Leaping over the fallen tree, Eugene walked deeper into the forest. This forest was usually infested with monsters. However, none of the monsters living in this forest dared to draw closer to Eugene. The killing intent flowing off of Eugene was something that he had developed during his life as Hamel, and the monsters didn't dare to enter the reach of that vicious killing intent. After he had walked for quite a while, Eugene turned to look at his surroundings. Even though he was in the middle of a forest, he couldn't hear the sound of even a single insect chirping. Even the insects had been silenced by his killing intent. Eugene extended his senses a little further beyond the silence that was surrounding him. The only things detected in his immediate vicinity were monsters. There weren't any traces of spells either. After Eugene dried his hands that were still dripping with blood by rubbing them clean on his cloak, he pulled out "We." "Tempest," Eugene called out. The cold wind subsided. As Eugene began operating the ring flame formula, he glared down at "We." "I know that you're listening to me. At the moment I'm a little bit royally pissed off. I'm not sure what I should do with all this rage, but right now I just so happen to be holding in my hand a sword that looks like it would break pretty easily." As Eugene muttered this, he lowered his face close to the reflective surface of WYD's blade. 6 years ago, my mana was insufficient, so I highly valued WYD's ability to easily summon spirits. But as you should already know, there's no longer any reason for me to treasure WYD, right? During this past 6 years, I'm accumulated a whole lot of mana, and I'm able to manifest sword force even without using WY. The wind had completely died down. Eugene stroked WYD's faintly trembling blade with his blood-stained fingers. Of course, WYD is a good sword. A magic sword with such a convenient ability is one of the most useful weapons in the entire continent. But what can I do? Right now my mood really feels like the fucking shit, and WY keeps looking more and more fun to break. Whoosh. As the blade trembled, it let out a gust of air. Eugene hadn't called for this wind. Oddly enough, the wind flowing from WYD was a refreshingly warm breeze. In response, Eugene just slammed down on the flat of WYD's blade with his clenched fist. Clang. WYD's blade vibrated with a ringing peal, and the wind was cut off immediately. You should know this since you've been watching me, but apart from WYD, I now also have the Moonlight Sword. That means that I won't feel any regret even if I do have to break your sword. However, Tempest, I'm sure that you'll find it a pity. Since you know me so well, you should also be familiar with my personality, right? I'm one bad motherfucker. Now then, you've got until I count to 3. This wasn't just talk. Operating the ring flame formula, Eugene raised his fist. White flames engulfed this fist. 1, 2. A voice rang out in his head, just as he was about to count to 3 and slam his fist down. Hold on. Whoosh. A surge of mana flowed out of his resonating and rotating cores. 6 years ago, his mana had been completely depleted after summoning Tempest for just a short time. However, that was no longer the case as he was now. Although his head felt a bit dizzy for a moment, that was just because of how suddenly his mana had been drained. Eugene first settled his agitated mana, then glared down at Wee. Eugene cursed, "You motherfucker. Do I really need to raise my fist just to get you to come out? You really are as barbaric as ever. The foundations are the same, so why would you expect anything different?" The wind blew wildly. The surrounding trees swayed as if they were about to be swept away by a storm, and the ground beneath was shaking as their roots were pulled up. Eugene narrowed his eyes and spat out, "Do you really need to kick up such a fuss just to appear for a short amount of time? It can't be helped as my presence is so huge." Tempest claimed. "A bastard who calls himself the Spirit King of the Wind can't even calm a single gust of wind?" As Egwene raised his fist once more, the swirling winds calmly subsided. "Just what in the world is going on?" Tempest asked after letting out a long sigh. Even if he was the Spirit King of the Wind, it was impossible for him to grasp what Eugene's situation was like at all times, as Eugene had yet to sign a contract with him. Even the summoning catalyst, Wed, had been placed inside the Cloak of Darkness, so Tempest couldn't help but be ignorant of what had happened within Vermouth's shrine. "We opened Vermouth's coffin just now," Eugene revealed. Tempest fell silent. There was nothing inside. So it was true. Eugene's face twisted into a scowl at these subtle words. "You were expecting this?" Eugene demanded. Tempest explained. It was impossible for something like what Vermouth had become to have died so quickly. From what I could tell, even though Vermouth still called himself a human, he was something that was free from the lifespan that every human being is supposed to have. "Then tell me why Vermouth faked his death." "Hamel. Though I know that you've been expecting me to be able to answer all your questions, I truly don't know anything about Vermouth. Stop with the bullshit and just tell me already. I can swear on my very existence. I do not know what was in the promise sworn by Vermouth, nor the reason he faked his death, nor how Vermouth managed to reincarnate you." Eugene clenched his teeth as he heard the voice of Tempest echo inside his head. For the Spirit King to make an oath on its very existence, it had to be serious. Moreover, this wasn't just any Spirit King, but the Spirit King of the Wind who had made this oath. The only one who could truly understand what Vermouth was up to was Vermouth himself. Though perhaps the Demon King of Incarceration may have also understood Vermouth. As Eugene stayed silent, Tempest released another sigh. However, it seems that Sienna, Molan, and Anise weren't able to understand Vermouth. What I can say for certain is that not only did they fail to understand him, but they even came to resent him. "Resent him?" Eugene repeated. "Just like how you can't understand why Vermouth had to make that promise, they too harbored doubts about it and grew to resent his decision. 300 years ago, all 3 of them were unable to accept the arbitrary decision that Vermouth had reached." Eugene tightly squeezed his lips together as he glared down at Wee. With a calm breeze, Tempest's voice continued speaking. "The battle with the Demon King of Incarceration was intense. The only reason why it was still considered a fight was because Vermouth was there." It wasn't too difficult to understand what Tempest meant by these words. The Demon King of Incarceration is one of the greater demon kings, ranked 2nd in power. "Hamel, you must know that he is such a terrible existence that the 3 demon kings you all managed to face and overcome together couldn't even be compared to him. Just like this name suggests, he plunges all your hopes and chances for victory into the depths of the abyss, locking them away forever." Eugene stayed silent. Sienna's magic couldn't pierce the Demon King of Incarceration's defenses. Anise's divine power wasn't able to illuminate the darkness that the Demon King of Incarceration summoned. Molan's charge couldn't even touch the Demon King of Incarceration. Eugene had only ever encountered the Demon King of Incarceration once during his previous life. He recalled a trembling darkness, the sound of creaking chains, and a red pair of eyes. The Demon King of Incarceration that he had personally faced at that time gave off a much different presence than when it had descended upon Hamel's grave in Nahama by using the Death Knight as its vessel. If it hadn't been for Vermouth, Sienna, Anise and Molan wouldn't have been able to survive for a second. It was only thanks to Vermouth that the battle with the Demon King of Incarceration was even viable. With Vermouth there, Sienna's magic managed to pierce the Demon King of Incarceration's defenses. Anise's divine power illuminated its darkness, and Molan's charge actually hit its target. Tempest stopped speaking for a few moments before continuing, but that still wasn't enough. The reason that their fierce battle instantly became a futile struggle was because everyone except for Vermouth couldn't keep up with the pace of the fight. Perhaps if you, Hamel, were there at that moment, things might have gone a little differently. At these words, Eugene couldn't help but burst into laughter. You're right. But it's all my fault that I died. I did something that I didn't need to do and I died even though I shouldn't have. That's why I've ended up in such a dog's hit state of affairs. If I hadn't died there and had instead died after picking off the Demon Kings of Incarceration and Destruction, I wouldn't have been forced to see things turn out like this. Hamel. Tempest's voice rang out once more. The past is already over and done with. There's no way that it can be reversed. If Vermouth really was behind your reincarnation, then it must be because there was a good reason for doing so. Vermouth choosing to make a promise with the Demon King of Incarceration must have been because he realized that he wouldn't be able to defeat the Demon Kings of Incarceration and Destruction with what power he had left. So what about it? Eugene asked sulkily. Your comrades weren't able to understand Vermouth, and Vermouth didn't desire his comrades' understanding. That unfathomable man plotted your reincarnation, even if it meant betraying his comrades, those who had crossed the line and followed him into danger even if they didn't understand him. The Vermouth that I knew from that time was always lonely, right up until the end, and he derived no happiness from being praised as a hero. Those idiots. Eugene lifted his head and glared up at the night sky. Sienna had ended up the same way. From what Mare had said, Sienna had lived in solitude for all her life. She hadn't found any lovers, never got married, didn't go to any parties, and just isolated herself in her study, working tirelessly on witchcraft. The promise that he made with the Demon King of Incarceration and the fact that the Demon King knows about your reincarnation, there must have been a reason that left Vermouth with no choice but to do this. Hamel, the fact that you resent Vermouth is... It's not resentment, Eugene muttered as he lowered W.E. This is, I guess you could say, it's betrayal. It's betrayal. Like you said, that bastard was a prick and we could never tell what he was really thinking. But that wasn't good enough. No matter what kind of incredible mission he was on, we should have. We wandered the world together with Vermouth. We tore our way across Helmuth. Hell, we even killed 3 of the Demon Kings. Eugene's voice shook as he continued. There was no reason for me to die in place of Vermouth. Even if I hadn't pushed him out of the way, Vermouth wouldn't have been in any danger. However, I still died for Vermouth. Because I thought that dying like that was the best death that I could have. Even before a hole was pierced through his chest, Hamel's body had already been dying. If he had tried to keep going together with them, then he would have just become a burden for them. Everyone had tried to convince Hamel that they should just retreat for the time being, but Hamel had refused to do so. Because he knew that even if he did go back, there was no way to heal that broken body of his. They had just barely, with truly narrow odds, managed to make it all the way to the Demon King of Incarceration's castle. Having threaded their way down such a dangerous path, their confrontation with the Demon King of Incarceration was right in front of their noses. If they retreated at that point, there was no way to be certain that they would ever be able to reach the Demon King of Incarceration again. But even if they did somehow manage to retreat and then make it back to the Demon King of Incarceration once more, Hamel still wouldn't have been able to be there with them. So he had willingly thrown himself in front of that final blow, and had died in Vermouth's place. Hamel had been convinced that he needed to die with this honor. The honor of dying for a hero, for Vermouth, for his friend. It was all just his own foolish self-satisfaction. It wasn't just me. Everyone there wouldn't have hesitated to die if it meant saving Vermouth. Because we all came to understand the truth as we progressed through our journey. Even I, who was always so full of selfish pride, understood it. Even if I died, Vermouth was not allowed to die. Even if everyone else died, as long as Vermouth was still alive, there would still be another chance. Eugene's voice continued to tremble as he confessed what they had all been thinking. His fingers holding on to WED seemed to be losing their strength as he continued. Tempest, if things were as you say they were, and Sienna, Anise and Molan did truly resent Vermouth, it wasn't because of Vermouth's arbitrary decision-making. It was because they knew that they were too incompetent, and they had become a weight chained around Vermouth's ankle. The guys and girls that I knew were just that type of people. They were the kind to resent themselves for their own incompetence, and resent Vermouth for not abandoning them when he should have. Hamel, Tempest said in a melancholic voice. Why should Vermouth have abandoned his comrades? Eugene couldn't answer Tempest's question. He didn't want you to die. You didn't have to die like this. He also didn't want to see Sienna, Anise, or Molan die either. That's why, when everyone else was defeated, Vermouth held back from delivering the killing blow with the Moonlight Sword. In that moment, the Demon King of Incarceration would still have been able to kill everyone except for Vermouth. However, that didn't happen because the Demon King of Incarceration instead was forced to make a promise with Vermouth. Eugene listened silently. That promise wasn't made for the sake of the world. It was to save the comrades who had stayed together with him until that final moment, and to reclaim your soul, which should by all rights have been annihilated. I know, Eugene acknowledged. Betrayal, rage, and resentment. Caught in the mix of these complex emotions, Eugene recalled a scene with Vermouth, right at the moment when they had first defeated a Demon King. We won. We won. Hamel, you son of a bitch. We've killed a Demon King. Did we really kill him? That fucking bastard, couldn't he just be pretending to be dead? He won't suddenly get up and attack us, right? How could someone like a Demon King use such a childish tactic? He might have been an enemy, but he sure was a great foe. I, Molan Roar, as one warrior to another, will recognize my match with the Demon King as one that will be remembered for the rest of my life. Fuck your great foe bullshit. Stop spouting nonsense and quickly hold your side together. Your internal organs are spilling out. Hamel, you fucker. We've killed a Demon King. Sienna, why do you keep calling out to me and cursing me when I'm just standing here quietly? This had been the 5th-ranked Demon King, the Demon King of Carnage. Just as Vermouth was pulling out the holy sword that had been thrust into the Demon King's chest, even though it was still clearly dusk with the sun setting on the horizon, Vermouth's brilliance shone so brightly that it seemed like the dawn had come. Everyone had been overjoyed at the fact that they had defeated the Demon King, but seeing Vermouth standing there with his back to the light, they all felt so reverent that for a few moments they forgot how to even speak. You fucker. You really... I guess you already know how well you fought, so... Yeah. We already know that it's thanks to you that we managed to defeat that son of a bitch, but do you really need to stand there acting so cool? It wasn't all because of me. Vermouth had looked down at all of them as he said this. All of us together, we all fought well. It's thanks to all of us working together that we managed to defeat the Demon King. So long as you're aware of that. I was pretty impressive in that fight, you know. Thank you. Vermouth rarely smiled. However, when he did, he smiled so brightly that it was hard to believe that this was the same person as the usual Vermouth. For not dying and for accompanying me here. Thank you. I knew that already. Eugene covered his face with his abused hand. It's because I knew that I didn't want to know. You never know, perhaps we might find Vermouth still alive. If that's the case, then I'm going to kill him for real, Eugene promised. Let's go to the north, Hamel. Just when Eugene was about to be overcome with emotion, what was this bastard talking about now? The mission that we weren't able to accomplish 300 years ago, now that you've been reincarnated, we can achieve it. 6 years ago you weren't strong enough, but now things are different. Take me with you to the north. You and I together will defeat the Devildom in the north that no one, not even Vermouth, has been able to conquer. Stop with the bullshit and just head back for now, Eugene ordered. Hamel, isn't that what you want to do as well? Not just yet, Eugene said as he unfurled his cloak. I'll go there eventually, but the timing is up to me. Tempest's silence was loud. Eugene warned him. So don't try to swing me around anymore. Ho ho. That's fine as well. Hamel, no, Eugene Lionheart, from this moment on, I will become the tailwind for your journey and, when you need it, the storm that protects you from your enemies. Instead of just talking so big, can't you try and consume less of my mana? It can't be helped. It takes a lot of mana in order to manifest a spirit king. Fine, I get it, so just go back in already. After placing WD inside of his cloak, Tempest's voice could no longer be heard.